Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. So this episode is inspired by two people. One is Elon Musk, who had admitted to being an Asperger's or being on the autism spectrum on Saturday Night Live a couple of days ago. So shout out to you, man. That's awesome. And the second person is Stephen Mark Ryan, who also is on the autism spectrum and decided to show us his answers to the autism spectrum quotient quiz, which I'm going to do also. So I thought that was really fantastic, and I appreciate both of you so much. I really do appreciate that, making me think about this. So anyway, this was inspired by them. I'm going to, of course, answer my answers to the question, but I think it's really valuable for us to understand that the more that this gets out, the more people understand about autism. And by the way, a lot of people still talk about Asperger's, but my understanding is that that term has been deprecated, and now you're just supposed to be a high-functioning autistic person as opposed to being Asperger's, which used to effectively be being a high-functioning autistic person. There are people who are low-functioning autistic, and it's very tragic. They have a really, really hard time interacting with other people in the world. If you've ever seen The Curious Case of the Dog at Midnight, that is a wonderful play, and it really goes into someone who has extreme autism and has a very difficult time interacting with the world. So certainly I'm not arguing anything like that for me. Obviously, I'm able to function in society. I have a job. I'm doing this YouTube channel, so things are working very well. But it is something that a lot of people have very difficult times with. This is not something to take trivially or lightly. It is a very complex and difficult condition. Before I do the quiz, I want to give you a little background on my life because I think it's important. So I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio in the late 1960s and into the 1970s. I'm 56. It's terrifying that I'm that old. But basically what that meant was in the Midwestern United States in the 1960s and 70s, you didn't have mental illness. It just wasn't a thing. It was just sort of like you weren't homosexual. People were, but nobody was, right? So you could have mental illnesses, but you could never admit that. And often people wouldn't admit that to themselves, of course. So of course, growing up, my parents were like, you're fine. By the way, my dad is completely autistic also. But my mom, to her dying day, will argue that me and my dad are both perfectly normal. We're both neuronormal. We're not anything weird or autistic or anything like that. We both demonstrably are. My dad is actually even further into the spectrum than I am. So anyway, but that's what I grew up with. I grew up with not understanding why I couldn't figure out what other people were going to do. I got beat up all the time as a kid. Thank goodness, to my mom's credit. I just said something, I guess, negative about her, but to her immense credit, she understood that I was drowning in public school, and she got me into a very good private school, university school in Cleveland, Ohio. Shout out to all the US guys. And that really saved my life, I think, in a way. I mean, not my life, but my mental health, because I was so put upon and I didn't understand how the world operated that when I finally got with a bunch of people, not all of them by any means, there are a lot of people who are still quite terrible to me, but I found a cohort of people who were more like me at that school, and we were able to survive and thrive. And that made all the difference in the world, really. I mean, in terms of my eventual future, going to Princeton University would never have happened if I'd stayed in public school. So all of that stuff kind of evolved from my mom making this decision that I needed to get out of public school. So I'm not saying that public school is a wonderful place. I teach at a public school at, University of Georgia. I'm not arguing against that for most people, but it was very difficult in the 1970s in Ohio. It wasn't like it is today. You didn't go to the principal and say like, oh, my child's being beat up on or something like that. The principal would say like, too bad, tell them to get tougher out there. That's the way the world operates. So it was a very different world back then, and it was very difficult to survive if you didn't understand the social norms. And one of the things about autism is you don't understand other people's emotions. Like, you can basically walk into a situation where somebody's going to beat you up and not understand that that's what's going to happen because you're not understanding the emotional signals that are being given off. One thing that did occur, of course, being at public school until I was in 7th grade, so kindergarten through 6th grade, I was at a public school, was that I did learn to very much control. I learned to understand the world around me, I guess is a way of putting it. So I was able to learn signals, and I was able to see that things could go wrong. So I learned how to protect myself. I learned not to be as enthusiastic about the subjects I was passionate about. I still am that way. I mean, I'm freaking Dr. Know-It-All on this YouTube channel, right? I love talking about things. I get really passionate about it, but I learned not to be passionate in social circumstances and to keep quiet because that was the only way to survive. So those were valuable lessons, but they were hard lessons. They were not things I understood naturally, and I still to this day don't. I am, in terms of emotional quotient, if it's like 1 to 100 score, I'm probably like 35 or 40, so I've gotten okay at it, but I'm pretty bad. And just ask my wife, she knows. She's just like, a lot of times she's like, how can you not understand how I feel? And I'm like, I just don't even have a clue. She'll say she's fine, and I literally take that at face value. I say, are you doing okay? And she's like, I'm fine. Just like that. And I won't get the emotional content. I'll be like, oh, cool. She said she's fine. So everything is awesome. And I'll go about my business. And then, 15 or 20 minutes or an hour later, she'll be pissed at me. So anyway, I put that completely down to my inability to really understand what's going on with other people, matched up with the fact that I care much more about things than I do about people. So I hate to say that, but I'm much more passionate about things than I am people. So that's why Tesla, SpaceX, any kind of technology, AI stuff. I mean, I, in some ways, am more passionate about computers and AI and about the way the code works and all of that stuff than I am about people. So that's not the greatest thing in the world to admit, but it's the truth. So there you go. Anyway, I wanted to start off with this Harvard Medical School news and research topic. And let me move down here. I just wanted to prove that it was actually from Harvard. So here we go. Autism and evolution. Genomics regions that set humans apart from other primates carry many autism-linked mutations. So this was something that was a real revelation to me. Again, like I said, I grew up thinking that I didn't have mental issues or I was cognitively normal, but that wasn't the case. And then when I realized that I probably had autistic, or at the time I called it Asperger's, tendencies, I became very depressed about that. And I thought that it was a horrible, horrible thing until I read one day, not this article, but another one that said something about how autistics are like X-Men, that we are mutations. We are the nature attempting to better itself. So becoming the next generation of human being. And I then was able to turn that around and stop being horribly embarrassed and, mortified about being autistic, to saying like, okay, so it comes with a lot of problems, but it's also a pretty darn cool thing. And that was a real big revelation. It didn't happen till relatively late in my life. I think, oh gosh, probably, somewhere around 35 or 40 years old. So, it was only about 15 or 20 years ago that sort of switch happened in my mind. And it made a huge difference. I was able to then come to terms with who I am emotionally and cognitively. And I think that was a very important point. But so anyway, this was not the article, but I'll link this in the description because I think it goes into some very interesting topics. But what I really want to talk about here is this. This is the autism spectrum quotient. I'm going to have to do this in kind of a funky way because I actually through OBS can't interact with where you're seeing here, but I have to do it over on the side. So it's a little funky. So if I'm looking to the side, just ignore that fact and we'll go through here. So the first question is, I prefer to do things with others rather than on my own. I definitely disagree. Notice it's agree, slightly disagree, definitely disagree. There's no neutral. You have to answer one way or the other. I would much rather do things on my own than with other people. I prefer to do things the same way over and over again. I'm going to say that's a hard one because I like to do some things differently, but gosh, but on a daily basis, I do everything exactly the same. You'll notice I look probably a little bit sweaty. I go to the gym every day, come rain or shine, whatever. And the ideas oftentimes come from either biking or going to the gym or something is when I get ideas. And as it happened, that's what took place with this as well. And I was too passionate about it to go take a shower. So literally I came from the gym and I'm home and I'm like sweaty and gross and nasty. And I still wanted to share this with you all. So that's what's going on here. So I might say definitely agree. Gosh, I think I actually will say definitely agree. It's very much one of those things where I like to do that. I do like to do some things differently because I'm also ADD. But in terms of my daily life, I really prefer everything's identical. And you can ask anybody around me. You can ask my sister and my brother when we were growing up. If anyone touched my stuff or anything like that, I would get really pissed. So I like everything in its place. I like everything to happen the same way. And when my wife asks me if I want to go do something, I always tell her ignore my first reaction because my first reaction will always be no. If she's like, do you want to go to the greatest movie on earth and then also go to the ice cream store and maybe win $1 million at the ice cream store, I'll say no. It doesn't, because in my mind, I already had 10 other things on the list of stuff to do. And eventually I'll think about it and I'll process it and say like, oh yeah, I actually would like to do that stuff. That's awesome. But my first reaction is always negative. It's always don't do that. So I do like to do things the same every day. The third one is, if I try to imagine something, I find it very easy to create a picture in my mind. I definitely agree with that. Whoops, I got to remember which side I'm on here. So I definitely agree with that. I picture things all the time. I'm extremely like sort of graphically oriented in my mind. I think that's one of the reasons why I test very well on IQ. The last time I tested, the test only went up to 147, but it was above that. I mean, basically just said 147 plus because I didn't know what it would test at. Probably today I would test lower because I'm older and so my brain is not as facile as it was at one point. But that's as high as I know it was. So who knows what it was above that, but it was definitely at least 147 on that IQ test. Not that that matters all that much, but I think a lot of IQ test is based on that sort of pictorial thing where you take three-dimensional objects and rotate them around in your head and you have to come up with what the shape would look like from a different angle or something. So there's a lot to do with getting a very good score on an IQ test to being able to picture things. So it does make a difference to that. All right, number 4, I frequently get so strongly absorbed in one thing that I lose sight of all other things. I super agree with that. Oh my gosh, people get so mad at me. For example, I'll be editing these videos and my wife will come in and she'll be looking at me and I will turn around and look at her like I want to shoot lasers out of my eyes because I'll be like, what are you interrupting me for? I'm editing my video right now, right? So that's like, I will do that. And if I'm computer programming or coding or something, I'll stay up all night. I'll forget to eat. I won't go to the bathroom. I'll be like so desperate by the time I, have to, eventually, nature's like, you are going to go to the bathroom, but I will be desperate by the time I get there. So I definitely agree with that. I often notice small sounds when others do not. That is absolutely true. I think that's one of the reasons I'm a good sound designer, or at least a decent one, is that I'm incredibly tuned to sounds. I usually notice car number plates or similar strings of information. Yes, absolutely. I was the person when I grew up that knew everybody's phone number. I could literally just tell you, somebody'd be like, what's so-and-so's phone number? And I'd just rattle it off. So I remember that kind of stuff. Dates are super important. I think dates is actually another question coming up here. But anyway, all right, so moving on down here. Other people frequently tell me that what I've said is impolite, even though I think it is polite. I'm going to slightly agree with this. I kind of learned over time how to curtail what I say. I think naturally I would say many things that are impolite, but I just keep them in my head and run them around and around and around. So I think things that are impolite all the time, but I've kind of learned to figure out which things people will take badly to and I don't say them. So I'm only going to slightly agree to that. When I'm reading a story, I can easily imagine what the characters might look like. Absolutely, I agree with that. I strongly have a visual imagination. I am fascinated by dates. Oh my gosh, yes. Like I literally will rattle it off. I'll know like when pieces of music, for example, like Don't Stop Believing, 1982. I was a junior in college and I remember reading and I was very specifically oriented to those things. Dates are an amazing thing to me. I love to know when things happened. It's just so cool to know all of that stuff. So I'm absolutely fascinated by dates. Absolutely. Kind of to an extent that's really unhealthy, I think. So there you go. In a small social group, I can easily keep track of several different people's conversations. That is very difficult. I don't know whether to say definitely disagree or just slightly disagree. I'll say definitely disagree to that. I tend to have a difficult time doing that. I'm really good at holding forth on one conversation, but multiple ones are difficult. All right, in a social group, I find social situations easy. I disagree with that. I'll say slightly disagree. I actually like social situations, but they are exhausting to me. The one thing I'll say is where I was at was the rock climbing gym, and so we were rock climbing. Social situations like that, I really do like, and they're energizing to me. So you're either climbing or you're talking about climbing, and it's very specific, right? And that can lead to other topics of conversation, but as long as it's really localized to that, I'm comfortable with that. But going to a party is almost like hell for me. Especially with people that I barely know. It's extremely difficult. I will do it for people that I love, but it's exhausting. I mean, I'll come home after an evening of doing that and I'll just have to lay on the bed because I'm so tired I can't do anything. So that kind of thing, it takes all of my energy out. I am definitely not, actually weirdly enough, I'm Myers-Briggs. I'm actually very slightly an extrovert, but I think it's in very specific situations that I'm an extrovert. So interesting. All right, for number 12, I tend to notice details that others do not. Absolutely. So definitely agree. People are all the time, they're like, what? I also don't notice things that other people do notice. So it's a weird thing, but I definitely notice details other people don't. I think that really helps because it helps me to have more of a synthetic imagination and to be able to put things together. Just today, I released a video on the Cybertruck as a chameleon, and you can catch that up here if you're interested. But I think that that's a detail that other people have sort of talked around, but nobody's really realized it. And so I said, wow, that's a really cool thing to talk about. Next up, I would rather go to a library than to a party, without a doubt. I love libraries. Now, nowadays, of course, the library is more like a I don't know, Google. I'd rather spend time on Google than going down a rabbit hole and watching YouTube videos, the equivalent of a library from back in the past. I find making up stories easy. Yes, I absolutely agree with that too. I have so many short stories and so many like screenplays and half-written novels and other things like that. I'm constantly coming up with stories in my head. So, they don't all get executed, and certainly nobody has purchased them by any means. But I think that's, again, one of the reasons why I like this YouTube channel, because most of my videos are kind of stories. They're little things that I can talk about. And I think that it's really valuable to have that capability when you're trying to do something like this, even, which is nonfiction by all means, but it still is kind of telling a story. Number 15, I find myself drawn more strongly to people than to things. I strongly disagree with that. My wife and my children are probably going to be sad, although one of my children is also certainly on the autism spectrum as well, so he'll understand. But I definitely am drawn more to things than people. Sorry about that, everyone in my life, but it's the truth. Number 16, I tend to have very strong interests, which I get upset about if I can't pursue. Oh, for sure. It's like if I'm on a trajectory, I want to accomplish that task, and that's it. Number 7, I enjoy social chit chat. I actually will say I slightly agree with that. I do like it within a context, but I also, again, I'm good in a social situation with just a few people, especially that I know, and especially if we're talking about something. Now, interestingly enough, people like me at parties because I will literally hold forth on anything. If somebody wants to start talking about Andrew Jackson or something like that, I know just enough about Andrew Jackson to be able to maintain and have an interesting conversation with someone, and I will learn something, and that's really cool. So I think that's the part out of it that I like. The next day, I will have no idea who told me that information, but I will remember the information. So again, the objects, the things that I learn are much more important than the human beings that impart that information to me. So that's just the way that goes. Number 18, when I talk, it isn't always easy for others to get a word in edgewise. I have learned how to be better about that, but that is, I would say when I was younger, that would be a definitely agree. Now it's just kind of a little bit of agree because I've gotten better about that, but it's something I really have to work on every day. I love to just talk right over people, and so I have to remember not to do that. Number 19, I'm fascinated by numbers. Absolutely. Love numbers, love dates, all of that kind of stuff just amazes me. I also happen to be synesthetic, which means that every word and decades and numbers and equations and everything have colors in my mind. So my brain is wired up all messed up. I'm ADD, I have autism spectrum, I'm synesthetic. It's a mess. So my poor brain is just like all over the place. It's just connecting things up all the time, which again is why I think I have a good synthetic mind, but it can be detrimental as well because it just means that it's kind of like constantly firing all the time. And that's the downside of being kind of autistic, is that you just can't turn all that stuff off, and you can't turn off the sensory stuff either. So it becomes really challenging sometimes to, live through a normal day. All right, number 20, when I'm reading a story, I find it difficult to work out the character's intentions. I will say I'm actually usually pretty good at that. I'll say definitely disagree to that. It's either slightly or definitely, but I'll say definitely. All right, I don't particularly enjoy reading fiction. I actually definitely disagree with that because I love fiction. I'm a huge fan. Moving on, I find it hard to make new friends. I will say definitely agree to that. I have a very difficult time doing that, and that's a tragedy in my life. I think that's terrible. All right, number 23, I notice patterns in things all the time. Oh my goodness. Man, do I agree with that. So again, pattern recognition, pattern creation is my thing. That's my jam. So there you go. Number 24, I would rather go to the theater than to a museum. I would disagree with that. I would rather go to a museum. I love museums. I think they're fantastic. Number 25, it does not upset me if my daily routine is disturbed. Holy mackerel, that's not true. I actually wish that there was like 2 more, like I think in psychology they say 7 is the best number, and this has only got 4. So I wish there was like a neutral and then there was 2 more at the outside, because this is something that I agree with so strongly or disagree with so strongly that I don't have a way of putting that down strong enough here. So I get extremely upset if my routine is disturbed. Number 26, I frequently find that I don't know how to keep a conversation going. That actually I will strongly disagree with. I'm actually pretty good at keeping a conversation going in general. I think. I hope other people agree with me about that. Number 27, I find it easy to, quote, read between the lines when someone is talking to me. I will say I strongly disagree with that. So, oh, whoops. Yeah, strongly disagree. Yep. Okay. Number 28, I usually concentrate more on the whole picture rather than on the small details. That is a tough one because I actually kind of do both, but I will say I tend to think about the whole picture. I don't know. I'll put slightly agree. That's so difficult sometimes between the two variables. Number 29, I am not very good at remembering phone numbers. I definitely disagree with that. I am actually excellent at that. It's a skill I have. Don't know how useful it is anymore, but it's definitely a skill I have. All right, number 30, I don't usually notice small changes in a situation or a person's appearance. Now, this is interesting because this is actually two different questions. I will recognize the tiniest difference in the situation, but I won't recognize anything about people. So that is an unfair question. So, man, I don't know. I'm going to say I slightly disagree. That's a very unfair question, and they really need to rewrite that question. That should be two questions. People, absolutely. I never notice anything different about people. With objects in the room, I will notice that in a heartbeat. I'm really good. I'd be great at being a detective because I can walk into a room and anything that's out of place, I'll be like, I guess a detective in my own life, if nothing else. All right, number 31. I know how to tell if someone is listening to me is getting bored. I definitely disagree with that. I probably bore the heck out of a lot of people and have no idea. I find it easy to do more than one thing at a time. I'm going to slightly disagree with that. I tend to really focus on one thing at a time when I do it. So I think that's true. I mean, sometimes I like to pretend I can multitask, but what I do is I go focus, 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 focus. So I'm more like a computer multitasking. I'm actually doing one thing at a time really, really intensely, but then shifting to something else. So anyway, I'll definitely slightly disagree with that. When I talk on the phone, I'm not sure when it's my turn to speak. I'll slightly agree to that. I think I have a little bit of a hard time. Depends on who I'm talking to. I enjoy doing things spontaneously. Oh gosh, no. The more I can plan for it, the better. I am often the last to understand the point of a joke. I will definitely disagree with that. I'm pretty good at humor normally, I think at least. Number 36, I find it easy to work out what someone is thinking or feeling just by looking at their face. Holy mackerel, no, I have no concept. I have to have cue cards. I have a friend who is a PhD student in psychology, and she tells me that she's going to write me up some cue cards someday to use with misinformation with my wife. So she can flash them up and be like, this is what you're supposed to be doing right now. So anyway, I'm terrible at that. So I freely admit that I'm really, really bad at that. Number 37, if there is an interruption, I can switch back to what I was doing very quickly. I'm going to say slightly disagree. I have a hard time, but I'm actually, I practice that a lot because I do get interrupted a lot. So that's the way my life goes. So I'm okay at it. All right. Number 38, I am good at social chit chat. I'll say I slightly disagree to that. That's a hard one again because I think I can make it up. I just don't care that much. 39, people often tell me that I keep going on and on about the same thing. I'll say slightly agree. I don't have enough friends that that's the thing. I don't have enough friends that anybody would tell me whether I was going on about the same thing. And probably the ones that I do have are probably just like, oh gosh, that's just John. He just talks. All right. Number 40. When I was young, I used to enjoy playing games involving pretending with other children. Man, oh gosh. See, I hate that because again, that's two different questions really, because I pretend all the time, even to this day, I'm always thinking about that. But I guess I'll definitely agree. I think even with other kids, I would definitely do that. So yeah. Number 41, I like to collect information about categories of things, types of cars, birds, trains, etc. Oh man, I definitely love doing that. That is my favorite thing. After numbers and dates and stuff, that's my favorite thing is just collecting bits of information, putting them together. Number 42, I find it difficult to imagine what it would be like to be someone else. I'll slightly disagree with that. I think I can do that. I mean, I'm a writer after all. So number 43, I like to carefully plan any activities I participate in. Absolutely agree. All right. let's get almost to the end of this thing. Thank you for sticking with me if you have. I know probably a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, the most boring topic in the world, but this is for the few, the proud. And I'm very interested, by the way, please let me know your score in the comments if you do this, because I'd be fascinated to know kind of percentage-wise of my audience, like how many people in my audience tend to be on the autism spectrum as well. All right, number 44, I enjoy social occasions. I mean, sometimes, but I'm going to say I slightly disagree with that. Number 45, I find it difficult to work out people's intentions. I will definitely say I agree with that because I do have that. That is a challenge for me. Number 46, new situations make me anxious. Oh, yes, I agree with that. Wow. Number 47, I enjoy meeting new people. I mean, it's not bad. I'll say slightly agree. Number 48, I am a good diplomat. I don't believe I am. I'm pretty bad at that. I tend to like to tell people what I think, and it's very difficult for me to curtail my opinions. Number 49, I am not very good at remembering people's dates of birth. Interesting. I actually am probably better at remembering their date of birth than their name, so I'm going to slightly disagree with that. And number 50, I find it very easy to play games with children that involve pretending. I definitely do. I think that's pretty cool. All right, here we go. You ready to score my answers? I'll probably have to scroll up so you can see it. Let's see if it actually tells me. Okay, so I scored 37. Now, interestingly enough, I took this test a couple of weeks ago and scored 39. So, I mean, it's pretty darn similar. But anyway, 33 to 50 range indicates significant autistic traits or autism. So, wow, what a gigantic surprise. I'm sure you all are blown away by that fact, right? Okay, so yeah, 37. Last time, like I said, it was 39. So who knows? I answered some of those questions slightly differently from each other. But there you go. That is a kind of probably an excruciating detail that nobody really actually wanted to or cared about. But there's going to be a few people out there who are going to be very happy to know that other people are like them and, weird, cognitively strange and wired up differently. So I hope that this helps people out who might feel a little bit different, and especially people like me who had a challenging childhood because you couldn't, or I couldn't figure out what other people's intentions were and would constantly get in trouble. And again, as a relatively intelligent, high-functioning autistic person, I'm very passionate about the things I wanted to talk about, and that would just cause problems with people because, that's not normal. I actually just watched The Mitchells versus the Machines last night on Netflix. If you haven't seen that, it's great. But the younger brother is wonderful, and I can't even remember his name. Eric, something like that. My gosh, see, I just don't care at all about the people. But I love the fact that he was clearly very autistic, super into dinosaurs. That kind of person is someone I can relate to so well. So that's exactly the kind of person that I am. Again, I really hope this helps a few of you out. For the most people, you're probably going to just tune out and just stop watching this video much earlier in the video. And that's fine too. It's like, I'm not saying that this is interesting to everybody, but I hope, again, if you have an interest in me and who I am, that's who I am. I'm a guy in his 50s who's autistic and has somehow maintained social connections with people. And I think it's the biggest challenge in my life, right? In a lot of ways, I would find it easier to invent something and to come up with something new than to maintain a relationship with a person, because it's so difficult for me to do that. But certainly kudos to Lane for sticking with me, because I am not the easiest guy in the world to live with. So thank you. So not just to the people who are autistic, but to the people who are around the people who are autistic, I hope that this is a helpful video and that some of you get something useful out of this. If you did, please do like it, because that way other people will find it and more people who need to see this video can see it. And of course, let me know in the comments what you think, and definitely let me know what your score was if you did end up taking the test also. And of course, feel free to ask me questions in the comments or at my email address, which is DrKnowItAllKnows@gmail.com. Till next time, bye-bye.